I've been in interviews where someone will say Edible Arrangements is a granny brand.
I love granny brands.
Is there ever a time when it's not appropriate to send an edible arrangement?
There could have been that somebody doesn't like fruit, and I would of course give them a weird look.
Do you have any data that suggests people are hate sending edible arrangements?
I don't know, I'll have to ask the team on that one.
How do you get them to justify paying for a quote-unquote overpriced fruit? Hello, I'm Ruth Umoh, leadership editor and host of Fortune Executive Exchange. Today, I'm joined by CEO Tariq Farid and his eldest daughter and Edibles president, Somia Farid, to discuss Edibles' rise from a flower shop to a floral-shaped fruit delivery service and now a global retail gift destination projected to rake in over $500 million in sales this year.
This is what happens when you sit, you forget everything.
Yeah.
Let's do it. It's like the Men in Black tool. What? Where am I?
Exactly. I'm looking forward to diving into their success story, but first, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment on this video and share your thoughts on our conversation below. Welcome both of you to Fortune Executive Exchange. Thank you so much for joining us. Quite a lot to get into. I want to first start with the here and now. Tariq, for much of Edible Arrangements, now known as Edibles' 25-year existence, you have been at the helm. More recently, you passed the reins along to your daughter, Somia. What was the catalyst?
It comes time to pass to the next generation because the brand has to reinvent. There's a new generation, and 25 years is a long time, and it's exciting, and especially when it's passing it on to your daughter. And I think it's time for the brand to evolve for the future. And 25 years ago when we started, it was all looking forward, and it's such an honor to be doing that right now.
Yeah. You say there comes a time when the brand has to evolve, you have to step down. We see a number of boomerang CEOs like Bob Iger at Disney. We see the Warren Buffetts of the world who stay on well into their 90s. How do you determine when it is time to pass the reins, when it's time to step down?
I think in a family business, you're always involved, right? And you have to be involved. But as the world changes and kind of the new technologies, new things are coming in, we were transformative at one point, and I think it comes a time that the next generation will take it to a whole new level. I see the ideas that Somia has, and a lot of those things aren't as close and as much of an interest to me, but the things that I'm focused on, I feel I can support a lot the way people supported me at that time. And I'm a believer in you do it sooner than later. Because one, you get to enjoy the success of the next generation, and second, I think you can do a very good supporting act and everything in this overall success.
You all have recently transitioned where obviously you're still remaining on as CEO, but you've been elevated to president. Talk to us about how you collaborate with one another and the catalyst behind that pivot.
I think for us, it's really about understanding what that next generation of consumers is looking for. Consumer behavior evolves. It's evolved even more in the last few years and really rapidly. So it's understanding, how can we make their lives a lot easier when it comes to gifting and having that perfect gift or treat for whatever moment it is and making those special moments extra special. So there's a lot of different tools and ways to do that. And a big one for us that we're exploring right now is personalization. How do we help them feel like they are a part of that gifting process, and how do we make sure that the recipient who's receiving it feels like there was thought and care put into it? So the team's exploring a variety of different avenues that will allow us to figure out how we tap into that next generation, because it's important for us to bring in that new consumer, and what will drive them is very different than what drives our current consumer.
Yeah, so what drives Gen Z?
I think they look for impact. I think they want to shop with brands that are impactful, and have a purpose. I think for me, one of the priorities is to continue to make Edible a very purpose-driven brand. Food is it's universal, right? And food gifting is universal. And growing up, we used to go to Pakistan a lot, and when we're driving to a family member's house, a friend's house, you always stop by and pick up fruit from a stand or a baked good. And I think that's it's like that for people across cultures. And it's nice for us to be able to be a part of that and think about, how do we make an impact, but how do we continue to become more global as well?
Certainly circle back on your globalization strategy in just a few minutes. I am interested in how the two of you collaborate. Obviously, you've been elevated to a higher position. Father is still there. How do you make that work, and how do you support one another through this process as you bring in new ideas and you're the one who has the many years of wisdom that come along with that?
Yeah, I can take that.
you
I think
start off.
I look at, my dad more as a coach, right? So if we have ideas or if I want to kick up a program, it's really more tell me what I'm not thinking about or tell me what's wrong. I don't think ideas in our family and in our business, ideas never get shot down. It's never a no. It's try, fail fast, and if you fail, learn before you try it again. And I think that's been instilled in me since I was really young, and I've been able to carry that forward with the team as well. So it's nice to be able to bounce ideas off of each other.
Yeah, curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's being modest now. She's been brilliant from a very young age and was involved in the business and has great ideas. I think I have to do a lot more because I want to give the freedom, and I think as you pass the baton, you want to give them the opportunity to, not necessarily fail, because my job is to make sure that to kind of caution on, be careful here and things like that. And it's for me, it would be more from brawn to brain. My grandfather used to say that a lot. That hey, you want to get from brawn to brain, that one day the body's not going to keep up, but your brain's only going to be better. And so I think from that point, she has a lot of experience. And in an entrepreneurial family, you may not think your family's being trained to be an entrepreneur, but at the dining table, when you're driving, you're constantly managing business and they're learning. So, one, very well prepared. Second, just making myself available, and Somia just does a brilliant job at kind of bringing ideas and being brave about things. And as an entrepreneur, it's really about taking risk. And if you can calculate those with some experience, it's even better.
How do you see yourself making your own mark on this company, bringing your own stamp, and what makes it markedly different?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're both very different in our leadership styles.
Yes, talk to me about that.
At least I think the entrepreneurial spirit is there, which is really important. I think any good leader needs to have that entrepreneurial spirit in the way they work and how they encourage their teams. But I'm very data driven. We were actually just talking about this earlier. I always liked things to be perfect before launch or before a new initiative is starting. And I've had to learn to be okay with a little bit of gray area and a little bit of uncertainty. And there's just times when you have to go with your heart or your gut. One thing that I've learned from my dad is leading with passion, right? It's important to make sure that you're injecting passion and purpose into the brand. And the data's there. It's important to look at the data as well, but there is a really fine balance. Yeah, and just making sure that you're listening to that gut whenever you can, and knowing that hey, there's something else here that we got to think about.
But it seems as though you still use the numbers to drive you or to drive strategy,
Definitely,
and then rely secondarily on the gut check. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think that's where I have to help her, and she has to help me on the part of we don't have we don't need data, but. So I think it does make a great tag team. I will tell you that there's a lot of things that I'll have an idea and she has a totally different approach to it.
Can you give a for instance?
I may want to launch a product, so I'll go out and previously I'll go out and I'll sit with the team and say we want to launch this product. And long time ago you can get away with just launching it and figuring it out. But especially now as we're facing higher interest rates and higher labor costs and everything, you want to be careful. So I think on that, where her approach of data, so I think you have to come up with some kind of a formula. I don't think you can ever figure anything out 100%. Long time ago, I used to say, as soon as you have a 60% figured out, go. The rest of it you figure out as you go, because you'll never be 100%. Maybe it's 80. So I think between that, where if I have an idea, she'll have her approach, or even our team. Our team just does a great job. But I think that combination, or that dance, as we call it, is very, very important. That you want to have data, but as Somia said, you don't want to be just stuck on that too, because you'll never make a decision.
Yeah. Your father just made this interesting point that you grew up obviously in this entrepreneurial family. There were a lot of teachings along the way, sitting at the dining room table, for instance. One could say you got an MBA your whole life. Talk to us about that experience and the impact it's made in your current role.
Yeah, I have been in the store since I was 6 years old. I used to go on the road with him to open stores, so I've seen them built from the ground up. I got to meet a lot of our franchisees at a very young age. So I think just being in that environment, you're always listening to the conversations, with franchisees, with team members. Now I realize how much I actually absorbed during those conversations. And it was, it wasn't always big things. Sometimes it was as little as, hey, always take care of the customer, or whenever you pick up the phone, make sure you're smiling because the customer they can hear it on the other end, right? So it's little things like that of customer care and providing that customer experience that I picked up on at a really young age that I've been able to carry forward. And just like building relationships with partners and franchisees. Those are just some of the things that I've learned, but there's endless examples.
I want to touch on your background. Before I do, however, obviously Edible Arrangements has many stores globally, as you already attested to. And certainly where I live in Upper West Side, there are a number of Edible Arrangements stores. However, we know that brick and mortar stores, a lot of them are shuttering. There's less foot traffic. So how do you still engage your consumers?
Well, I like, this whole part of brick and mortar shuttering has been around, since the 80s. That people always talk about maybe the days of retail is over. I think it's how you present retail is changing. So I think it's more about an experience. And we're going through this interesting transformation right now. After 25 years of having retail locations during the pandemic, everybody thought that maybe we'll go to ghost kitchens and we won't really have retail, where retail is coming back very strong. People want that experience. People want, that now it's more last minute than ever. There's an interesting change going on that happened during the 80s, when 800 numbers came out and credit cards came out. Everybody thought everybody was going to place orders over the phone. No one's going to come into a store, where we have to evolve the stores for the next generation and everything. And at the same time, there's just nice combination of what we call edible.com and edible.store. And so we have to win both of those experiences and have to do a great job and everything. And I think part of that, what Somia has done a great job is on the whole .com side. That's where she started on the digital side and just has brought in some great things. And at the same time, a lot of those things are coming into the store now. Mm-hmm.
So what changes in the store?
You want to touch
Yeah,
on that?
we have a next gen retail model that we're working on right now. It's very experiential. It's very digitally driven. You can walk in and get any kind of food gift or treat for yourself, no matter the occasion or the moment. So it's all about that ease and convenience, the speed, without sacrificing the quality and the freshness. We have about 5 stores opening next year across the country, and hoping to sell another 20 stores. And the digital aspect is really important. So we have a really strong e-commerce platform, and we're looking for ways to continue to build a really strong omni-channel presence and inject more of a digital experience into the stores as well.
Personalization, like you want to be able to go in and personalize a gift, add a picture to the container or to the card, and be it even printed on the on a cheesecake or something like that. So there's a lot going on of personalization, and then even the speed. I would say the speed is the biggest thing right now. Where 10 years ago you can say we'll deliver tomorrow. Now you have to think about how to deliver in an hour. And to do the same experience, because we started with a wow. We started really, really simple, and there's a great story behind it where we didn't have much budget, and we would guarantee that this gift will wow the person who's receiving it. If they don't use the word wow, call us, we'll give you your money back. And it's so nice to be able to deliver on that even now when you're trying to deliver something within an hour. Mm-hmm. And so great job by the franchisees, that evolution of keeping up with the times and everything. So I think the speed part, and to deliver a perfect gift within an hour and to be able to pull it off, I think that's a great accomplishment.
And I'd add also the variety in the offering. So most people have known us for the large fruit baskets, but you don't always have a need for a fruit basket that's going to feed 5 or 6 people. You might want something smaller. So the offering has expanded significantly as well. So from a single cheesecake or strawberry to a bouquet of flowers to a box of cookies. I think that's the other thing that's really unique with where we're going with Next Gen. It's just the offering is so much wider, and it gives you so many more reasons to interact with the brand.
And it's because it's about moments, right?
Yeah.
It's not about those big occasions anymore. It's those little moments that you want to celebrate. Sort of where you can send an emoji, we like to be able to send an edible arrangement.
Absolutely. Well, that's an interesting point you make because as we know, we're seeing higher inflation, higher interest rates. Certainly the younger generation, millennials and Gen Z, are feeling that their wallets are getting very tightly pinched. So how do you get them to justify that in many ways they're paying for a quote unquote overpriced fruit?
Yeah, we've had to do a lot of work to shift that perception. When I took over the e-commerce team in 2019, one of the first things that we did was launch Gifts Under 50. We'd never had a category called under 50 before, very limited offering in that space. So we expanded it, added new SKUs, and very quickly saw it convert at a really high rate, which was nice. And I think that helped us introduce a new generation to the brand. So that year that we launched it, we saw a 100% increase in purchases from Gen Z. So I think that's something we're going to continue with, especially in times when discretionary income is limited. Because in the end, I think it's really important for us to be an approachable brand. And we want people to really enjoy the product and know that you don't have to buy a whole lot to have that enjoyment.
So Issa Rae did an interview recently with The Cut. You might have seen this.
Yes.
And she was talking about etiquette, and she said that she absolutely does not want to receive an edible arrangement. She said, it's just too much for her to finish at once. It's a bit wasteful, and so on and so forth. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that kind of criticism and how you approach sharp criticism. Are you finding that people are very pro-edible arrangements and others are very anti, or what are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think for us, we see that criticism. I've been in interviews or, speaking on a panel where someone will say something like, edible arrangements is a granny brand or it's a grandma brand, right? And I think that just fuels the fire even more to change the brand perception and make it more modern and elevated. I love Issa Rae, so when we saw that, we were like, okay, it's a tough situation, but at the same time, it just shows us the opportunity that we have to redefine the brand and what the brand is all about, and really redefine the offering that we have. So we take that criticism and really look at it as an opportunity to continue to show the world how we've grown and how much the brand has changed in the last few years.
And I love granny brands. Why? Because who doesn't love grandparents, right? So, and not only that, it's gifting. Gifting is supposed to be special. When you send somebody, who wants to send a cheap gift, right? Who wants to be known as sending something, so we want to do that hand delivery. We want to almost add that little personal touch. And what I love about franchising is there's a small business owner that the order goes to who lives in that neighborhood, who's going to do that little personal touch. And my mother used to have this tradition. She would be in the back of the stores, didn't really speak English. Whenever a customer would come in, she would always come and do a finishing touch on a bouquet always. And she would compliment the customer, say, thank you for coming in. Here's a little thing I'm adding. And the customers would always remember that. And with the gift is always about a wow. You can't make everybody happy, but our thing is that as long as we can make 99.9% of them happy, we're in good shape. So our stats are pretty good. Our franchisees do an amazing job of getting every order out and making it perfect. And we want to make it a premium. No one should feel that this was a cheap gift. Yeah. And especially when it's food, you gotta not only get the aesthetics right, it's gotta look great, it's gotta taste great, and it's gotta give you that great feeling. And we wanna make sure we deliver on that.
Does that premium branding still work if you're making this pivot to, marketing it as something to get, not just for those iconic moments or big holidays, but just as you got it through the week?
Yeah, I think it's the experience, right? It's that hand delivery, it's the packaging. So as we go through this rebrand, we're revamping all of that packaging. It's really taking that unboxing approach to the next level. So I think it hits across areas. It's not just specific to the price point and that accessibility. It's really about the overall experience that still makes it a wow.
What's your demographic to date?
Today, it's pretty broad. Women over the age of 35, we're starting to come younger and get more into younger millennials and Gen Z. So, with the power of data, we're able to do a lot of segmentation and create messaging that's specific to each audience. So it's no longer targeting one audience. It's really about having multiple audiences, and they change throughout the year, right? So for example, during Valentine's Day, our audience is incredibly male heavy. So our messaging shifts accordingly. So it's pretty dynamic, but when it comes to the tone of voice, our content, it is starting to skew a little younger to start to introduce the brand to that next generation of consumers.
Speaking of marketing, you changed your name from Edible Arrangements, which you've always been known for, to just Edible Brands. When I think of edibles, I think of cannabis, obviously, and some wild nights in college. So what was the thinking behind that pivot?
Oh, people called us edible from the beginning. I mean, so, we were known as Edible Arrangement, and, back in 2006, 2007, customers would call and they'd say, use the word edible to describe us because they left the arrangement part off. So for us, the evolution was from edible arrangements to edible was because that's where our customers were saying. And we saw a broader opportunity as we go to, as we broaden the offerings and everything. It was never really cannabis in mind back then when we started. And it's just, that's what's catching up now. And so it's not connected with cannabis, but, we'll see where it goes.
Do you see yourself exploring cannabis infused, I don't know, melons, skewered melons?
Look, I think it's an opportunity.
Sure.
I think for us as a brand, as we start to think about cannabis, it's really more from a health and wellness angle. If there ever is an opportunity there, it's about continuing to spread goodness and helping people feel good. It's something that our executive team talks about a lot. We talk about it all the time, and it may happen one day, it's just not today.
Do you see that harming the brand at all? Because when I think about edible arrangements, I know you use the term granny, but I do see it as being very homely. So do you see any impact in terms of branding if you did make that foray into cannabis?
No, I don't. Look, I think that's the job of the brand, right? So I think, if our objective as a brand from the beginning has been to wow, so we better make sure that does not get compromised. And fortunately, unfortunately, whatever you want to call it, this is what the consumers are taking, the cannabis towards, right? That's what's happening. And so I think there's a health and wellness opportunity there, and we'll figure it out when the time comes, because even now there's a lot of confusion on where this is going. But we don't, we're a gifting brand, and I think nothing better than gifting health and wellness.
Yeah. And look, if they imbibe in some cannabis, and they'll get the munchies, and they'll go and order more chocolate and fruit from your website.
It does have a secondary benefit.
Exactly. Well, Tariq, I'd love to focus, on your background, and I know you talked about it at length. But for our viewers who might not know you, give us a little bit of background information about yourself. Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? Who is Tariq, and how did you?
Yeah, landed in the U.S. at 12 years old, kind of following the family. Grew up for the first 12 years in Pakistan in a farming family. My father came here a few years before us, worked as a machinist, and then worked at Burger King, McDonald. So when I got here at 12, you had to help. As any, most immigrant families, everybody works. So had to help and got involved, and first started delivering newspapers when I was 11, 12 years old, cutting grass and all of that, and then landed an amazing job at Fariselli's Flowers in West Haven, Connecticut with Charlie Fariselli, one of those neighborhood entrepreneurs who wants to take care of all the employees that are working for him and everything. And I learned a lot from him, and had an opportunity to buy a flower shop that had closed for about $6,000. So my father's boss gave me a 17-year-old a $6,000 loan to go open a flower shop, and always loved computers, so started to kind of balance an IT business with the flower business, and just did phenomenal, and then fast forward 99, 98, had this opportunity of doing fruit arrangements, and we started it in a small little section of our flower shop, and it just took off. And so here we are, 1,000 some odd stores later, and it has nothing to do with the cannabis. So very, very excited
Maybe
with the brand as well.
Maybe a little bit to do with the cannabis. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, $6,000, giving that to a 17-year-old, why?
Well, I think somebody has to ask Bill and Denise Holtberg, how do you make that decision, where back then $6,000 in 80 was a lot to give to a 17-year-old, but I made sure that we paid that back within a year and a half. And I think when I do ask him, he does say that, well, I believed you would be successful. And I thought, and it was just worked hard. The only thing I knew at that time is to work hard. I saw my father work hard. I saw my mother work hard. And you really didn't have a choice. It was not like there was a selection. Even if you were going to go to school, if you're going to college, you had to decide. You were helping the family, should I go or not? And that's what happened with me, where a lot of those opportunities. I actually wrote a paper in middle school that I wanted to be a surgeon. I'm glad I did what I did, because when the family needed help, I started working, and I learned so much. So by 17, I knew how to run a business and never looked back.
Running a flower shop is pretty straightforward. How did you go from that to let me buy fruit, craft it, turn it into flowers, put it on skewers, and sell this as part of an arrangement? I mean, that's quite the pivot.
So I think everybody thinks running flower shops, I would tell you, florists are probably some of the hardest working people in the world. But you got to remember that this is fresh flowers you got to treat them. There's a lot involved. So my training in the floral helped me on my being prepared for the fruit part. So I think that journey made it easier. And in the beginning, it was a lot of hard work. I mean, we did not have the funds to go, I wrote a big business plan in the beginning and tried to borrow $120,000. It got rejected because no one thought the idea was going to work. So we went ahead and just bootstrapped it. But along the journey, having all that experience in the flowers really helped. And I think at the end of it, it's about the customer. We made, the first holiday was Easter in 1999. And we made 28 arrangements, and it took us all day to make 28 orders. Because we had no equipment, we were hand cutting everything. Every customer called and said, wow, can I order another one? This is amazing. I didn't know you guys made this. And we knew as soon as you see the customer's response, you knew you were on to something. And at that point, there's no looking back. You figure out how to, automate and get more equipment. And we had things where even containers, I made trips to China back then to try to find containers that were food safe. Because before that, it was all about flowers, and you couldn't put the fruit arrangements into those containers. So we had to get our own containers. That started a whole new business for us called Berry Direct, which is where our sourcing is and everything, and then needed a website. So we started another business called Netsalis that would do all the technology and the POS systems and everything. So everything kind of just came together. It was like an ecosystem.
You said you had to bootstrap. You were turned down for a loan, I'm assuming a bank loan. What did that look like in practice, bootstrapping? How did you get financing?
You just don't make any money. You put extra miles on the car, you negotiate with the landlord, you go and negotiate with the vendors. But I'll tell you that having that hunger is really good on the customer side, because you really want to take care of that customer, because you want them to tell 10 other people. And that's what worked really well for us. I mean, we're still low debt, and one of those things that created a habit of live within your means.
At what point did you think to yourself, wow, I've made it? What was that point where you got a pretty sizable check and you said to yourself, wow, I'm really onto something here?
For me, the first time was probably when my accountant told me you owe a lot of taxes. And I'm like, taxes? What do I owe taxes for? I didn't know we made that much money. And he shows it to me. He goes, oh, you made good money here, and you reinvested it. So at that time, when I saw the first tax bill, I'm like, oh, okay, we made it. So I would say it was probably more that. But I don't think you're ever done, because when you start this, a lot of people will look at, along the journey, people will say, when is enough? When you're focused on the customer and when you're focused on building a brand, it's never necessarily about a destination, it's about the journey. And so I think with that, it's exciting what we see now as the opportunity. For me, the true aha moment is when somebody knocked on our door and said, I want to buy a franchise.
Yeah.
That's when we knew, like, wow, you want to do what? I'd love to buy a franchise. I want to open up one in Boston. And then, so it's that saying, great brands are bought, never sold. So if somebody comes to you, that means you've built something and they want that. Yeah. You've got something. So for me, that was probably the aha moment from a brand point of view, but from a personal point of view, it would be, when you start to see where you can pay the rent and not have to struggle with funds.
I know you said, you're never thinking, there have been multiple times in your career where you had that aha, I did it, I'm onto something moment. Obviously, financial metrics are a huge milestone for most business owners, certainly small business owners. Walk us through how you made your first million.
Yeah, same thing. We opened our first, so I had a flower shop. And our first flower shop in East Haven, Connecticut, hit 1.2 million in sales. And the day that it hit million, there was a big celebration, because back then, that was the goal for a small business owner. If you can make it to that, you can afford to hire more, you can turn around and get into a little better location. And your brand has made it, because that's thousands and thousands of customers who are coming in and recognizing your brand. So for me, it wasn't necessarily about the money, but it was that now this business is self-sustaining. So now we can move on to the next location. And I think you just have to prove one out. And if you could prove one out, then doing multiple or getting to 100 locations is not hard. I would say that million probably was the hardest journey. But once you hit that, then, I don't remember when we hit 100 million or 200 million. I don't think we ever stopped at that point.
And the million was the hardest journey because?
Because, one, you don't have the means to do it. It's not like, as I had mentioned earlier, I couldn't get loans because when people looked at it, they looked at this concept of fruit in baskets and didn't think it was going to work. And then the rest of it is just, you're just selling and you're going month to month. And we were never really trying to hit 1 million. It's not like even now, it's about the quality of the delivery and making sure the experience of the customer. So I think majority of the businesses that hit 1 million, it is usually a surprise. But once you hit it, you have a great location. Now you can go to any landlord and say that I have a business, this is what it does in sales, I'd like to get a location, the doors are going to open for you. So I think that journey is hard because for us especially, we did not have access to funds. And that has been the struggle, and there will always be the struggle for startups or small businesses of getting funding. And especially as a minority, it was even harder. So I think making it now, and the biggest thing wasn't that you hit 1 million, you feel that you're self-sustaining now. And I think I can make it, and I can share this experience with others, and that's more achieving that milestone.
Within 2 years, roughly 2 years of launch, you franchised your first edible arrangements. Was that your plan all along?
I pretended it was my plan all along, but we wanted to scale, but we weren't sure which way. So when I first thought that we can get a loan, our plan was to open multiple locations. But I heard about franchising and didn't think we can pull it off until somebody walked in. So I knew about franchising. I worked at McDonald's. It was one of the best jobs I ever had, at Burger King and McDonald's.
Why?
Well, my father worked there, so I got a job. Back then, when you were 15, if you did really good in school, they gave you a work permit to work. And then my father's boss at Burger King gave me a job. So I would actually take a bus from West Haven, Connecticut to Milford. It was about a 1-hour bus ride. And I would go after school, from middle school, I would go and work there. It was just the processes. They had systems and everything was a process. And from there, I ended up going to McDonald's and did really well. And so I always had that in the back of my head that there's this concept of franchising, didn't understand it. Only knew the inner workings, not how you franchise a business. But when the opportunity came, somebody walked into our store and says, hey, I'm in Boston and I love to build one of your stores. Do you offer franchises? I had heard the word franchise. So of course, at that point, I'm like, of course, we've been thinking about it, let's do it. And we were able to pull it together real quickly. And it was probably one of the best things we did.
Well, since that serendipitous day, you've expanded into Texas and other areas within the continental U.S. You've expanded globally into China and certainly other countries. How do you determine what makes sense in terms of expansion? And are you still looking to scale your physical footprint?
Yeah, I think for this year and for next year, the focus is really on the continental U.S. and building the next gen stores here, but always looking for opportunities all over the globe. And it's really about finding the right partner, and a partner who has scale and who can come and have the operations and the strong business acumen, financial acumen to take our brand and to localize it. Something I think we've learned from our international expansion is that what works here doesn't always translate in other parts of the world.
For instance?
Certain fruits may not be available, or there might be other fruits that are widely available. So for example, in the Middle East, our arrangements have dates in them, right? But they don't have dates in the US. So what we've done is, with our international partners, given them the opportunity to do their own innovation and come up with their own products, and really let them drive the bus from that perspective, because they know what their consumer is looking for and they know the market really well. And I think that'll be the strategy as we continue to expand globally.
Localized innovation, right? Localized innovation experience. But at the same time, I think with the whole e-commerce and this social media phenomenon, the world has shrunk. and so the opportunity. So where we may have had an opportunity of, let's say, a couple of thousand locations in the U.S., now it's more like 6,000 or 7,000 locations globally. That and you can do that where you can give a consistent experience on the web level. It's sort of the Uber, right? So we would love edible.com to be the booking.com of gifting, right? So where you could go anywhere in the world and send a gift, and people are, kind of moving a lot. So now it's not about countries, it is about kind of global different countries and everything. So I think the experience at the store will be very different, but online it'll be pretty consistent. So it'd be nice to be able to send somebody in Dubai a gift in a minute, and we'd love to solve for that.
I want to look at financial metrics. In the early days, what did sales look like? Let's say the first 5 years, and how does that compare to now?
Pretty consistent. I mean, sales, of course, one thing as entrepreneurs, you have to be prepared for, the good days and the bad days and everything. And we can pretty much say we've gone through everything, so especially with what happened over the last few years. But, there's a consistency to that. As long as people are celebrating, there's always going to be a need. So our sales have always been steady. Or the objective now is to try to get most of our stores to a million something in average sales, and customize each store where they own that neighborhood. It's so that franchise owner really gets to know the neighborhood and is advertising and promoting according to the neighborhood. So with that, it's pretty hard to have a consistent stat that every one of your stores is going to do the same. Every store is according to either the team or the owner as to how involved they're in the community and everything. But we could deliver a lot from the web level now, where people look for convenience, and we can give a pretty consistent experience. And now we're even doing third party. So I think the opportunity is much bigger now than before, because you can reach so many customers. We have stores now that have 1,600 people on every day following what's happening at that store. So as that store puts up information about, I'm making this today, or we have this product coming in, people place orders. I haven't seen that. I'm blown away with that. Where before you had to do mailers and send things out and invite people for samples, where now you can really do it online on a social media and be interacting with customers in real time. So I think the potential is bigger than ever before.
We're obviously a business publication, so I have to ask, what are your projected sales for 2023?
Yeah, we're looking at just at about 500 million for this year. And from a store perspective, something else to add, even 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't have all of these categories and offerings. It was just arrangements and dipped fruits. Now we have flowers, we have cheesecakes, cookies, a whole bake shop line, we have chocolates. So I think introducing all of these new offerings and categories is what will help get our stores to that 800K to $1 million mark. Which we just never had before. There's only so many arrangements you can sell, right? Like I said earlier, there isn't always a need for an arrangement, but there's usually a need for a small treat, even if it's just a single cheesecake. So I think introducing these product offerings is really what's going to help us increase that average unit volume.
I've seen estimates that your company is valued at about 600 million. Are you eyeing 1 billion, forging forward? Is that the next metric for you, hitting that unicorn status?
Look, all of us, of course, as entrepreneurs, there's a different level of success. And for me, the success is always the quality of something, not necessarily the quantity. Right?
But the quantity, going back, she said she likes data points.
Yeah. I think, I'll share this with you. Like my mother, when I started out and I was only 18 years old, I would walk in every day. I would walk home and I wasn't happy. And my mother's like, what's going on? I'm like, not enough sales. And she said something. She goes, honey, stop chasing money. Money runs really fast. Go do the right thing. It'll chase you. And so I think with that, that part of making sure you take care of the customer, I don't want to compromise that. That's the big thing. And I think there's a nice balance here where, even now, if you look at it post the pandemic, people are looking for a nice life balance, right? The number of hours you work, the things that, what you want to do. And I think our brand offers that. Could we achieve $1 billion? Yeah, but I don't want to lose money by getting there. There are a lot of brands that will achieve that, but then the health of the brand isn't good. For me, the health of the brand is very, very good. And I think it's a journey, right? It's a journey where it's one brick at a time, and you want to have solid steady growth. I sit here right now to sit here at 500 million when in the first year we did $192,000 in sales. I'm in awe.
Yeah.
So I think you just want to make sure we slowly, steady, have solid growth.
Do you see yourselves keeping this as a family business? Do you see yourselves selling it at some point, maybe to private equity, IPOing if you get that far in advance? Is there an exit strategy?
All of the above.
Yeah.
All the options are on the table.
We talk about every single one
Yes.
of those options regularly. Yeah.
And look, at the public part, I mean, when you're living an American dream, I think that's part of the American dream. If you could take your brand and you could, take it public and you can make it part of the American fabric. So we're in awe that, it's a household name. And, there is the next stage of looking at, we'll weigh that when that time comes and everything. If it's right for the brand, if it's right for the team, that's what we will do. And I think, those are options that we're looking at right now. And I will say, I see a better runway now than I've ever seen before. So I think from that point, we may be talking about this stuff soon.
Exciting. Well, keep Fortune in mind when you're ready to share that story. I know we're running up on time, so I'm going to do rapid fire questions. And this is for the both of you. Is there ever a time when it's not appropriate to send an edible arrangement?
I don't think so. I think there's always an occasion and a moment to send an edible.
So look, when we started, we had occasions where the guy or the gal is in trouble and they need rescue right away. There's an edible for that, So, so I think there is no reason that you wouldn't want to give a gift, So I think everybody likes a gift, everybody likes a surprise. So I don't think there is a reason. And then we almost have product for everyone right now. Now, previously, there could have been that somebody doesn't like fruit. And I would, of course, give them a weird look, like, what do you mean you don't like fruit? But now we have flowers, we have cheesecakes, we have all these occasions. So what I love about our brand right now is that there is there's a gift for everyone in the house, because sometimes customers would call and say, oh, my mom doesn't like chocolate. And then we would struggle there as into what to do there. But now we can send mom a beautiful rose bouquet that she can enjoy for a week. No, there is no reason that somebody shouldn't be sending an edible arrangement. Everybody needs to send an edible arrangement.
Well, piggyback off of that, you're likely familiar with this already, but there's a scene in the Netflix show, The Fall of the House of Usher, in which the protagonist tells her assistant, everybody knows that edible arrangements are what you send to people you hate. Do you have any data that suggests people are hate sending edible arrangements?
I don't know. I'll have to ask the team on that one if we've seen that. But we sent the actress, Kate, an edible arrangement gift.
You did?
With a little note, thanks for the shout out. Just want to let you know that there's more than just edible arrangements available at Edible. And she posted it on her Instagram story and gave us a shout out and said it was low-key brilliant. So it's really, when we see interactions like that happen, we always like to play into it and be a part of it. And it's always nice to see their reaction after the fact. So we were actually, when we saw that, we had a bunch of team members who were watching the show and we were like, oh my God, she just talked about edible arrangements. So we take it as flattery in a sense.
Free marketing.
Yes, exactly.
And I love that she said that you send it to people you hate. So now you have a gift to send to people you hate. I love that.
So there is no reason not to send
We should be
edible.
sending something sweet to people we hate. That's what we should do.
Let me ask you this. Well, first of all, and most important question, what's your favorite fruit?
For me, pineapple. Yeah.
Mango.
Okay. Any celebrity super fans of edible arrangements?
I'd say, I don't know if he would call himself a super fan, but Jimmy Fallon has featured us quite a bit on his show. So we've been in a variety of skits and he's featured us quite a bit over the last few years.
And Brad Pitt did a little stint with an arrangement. Since then, he's been
With
my
Jimmy
favorite.
Fallon,
Yeah.
yep.
So
I'd call that a super fan. And then last remaining questions, best business advice you've received, worst business advice you've received?
do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll give you the best one. And it would probably be from you. When you hit that 50% mark with an idea, go and iterate from there. So don't wait to launch something. Don't wait for the data to be perfect. If you have the idea and if it's half baked and half there, run with it and know that you could just take an incremental approach to make it better.
Yeah, progress over perfection.
Yes.
The best advice I ever got, it was probably the first advice I ever got, customer is king, always take care of the customer, everything will work out.
Worst business advice you've ever received?
I would say I've been lucky that got a lot of worst business advice. Probably haven't followed it. Lucky enough to live within the means. So I can't think of any worst business advice right now.
Fair enough. Well, final question for the both of you for these rapid fire questions. What makes for a good manager or an effective leader?
I think empathy is really important. I think it's important to know and understand your team and your customer, right? If your team is happy and if they feel that you care about them and you understand them, it helps them do the same for our customers.
To support the team, because if you have a team member to support, so I think instead of telling them how to do it, let the person go figure it out and support them along the way. And for me, I've seen that with Somia more than ever. Even when she was like 10 years old, she knew at that point she wants to be in the business, and just kind of supporting and kind of guiding is best. So I would say for me, it's always been you hire a team member for their talent and support them.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you both, Tariq and Somia, for joining us on Fortune Executive Exchange. I can think of quite a few people who I love, but also some who I hate, who I'd love to send edible arrangements to, but this has been such a robust conversation, so thank you.
Great, thanks for having us.
Well, you said you always look for the wow factor.
Yeah.
There's certainly a wow factor here. Wow.
Excellent. That's the response we always want.